back to another episode of Planet Hunters Coffee Chat. I'm your host, Cassie Prolongo, and of course, joining me as always, the lovely Nora Eisner. Good to see you, Nora.
Good to see you, Cassie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Oh my gosh, I mean, most people know because I've talked about this before. I love being your friend. You're a dear friend of mine. But I think that our friendship has gone to another level now because now we're starting to send astronomy memes to each other. And I have to admit, that is the best thing
They are
ever.
so good. We should definitely have an episode on astronomy memes because they are so funny. And that
Guys,
might just be me thinking that, but one way to find out.
yeah, should we? I mean, honestly, no. I feel like, take joy where you can find it. And if there's one thing that's giving me joy right now, it's the crossover of Lord of the Rings slash astronomy memes. You guys,
So
it's the
good.
best. It's the best. So this week we're going into vetting reports. So we did do an episode and we'll link back to that one where we actually talked about it, but now we're going to talk about a couple of different ones. So with that being said, I hope that you join us with your tea or coffee. I have no idea why I grabbed this one today. This is my jerky one.
Oh, I love it. Is that a Christmas mug? I love it.
It says shake your tail feather. So I think it's more of I know it's silly, but you know what? Again, find your joy. Find things that bring a little bit of happiness. If it's doing things like this and watching these episodes with us, we appreciate it. So join us. So let's get into it, Nora, and get off this silly subject that I'm on right now.
Do you know, when I was in school, we had dance and we did a dance to a song called Shake Your Tail Feather. Anyway, that's my contribution to that. Betting reports.
Yes.
We have looked at vetting reports before, but last time we looked at the short vetting reports, but there are also, as I mentioned, when we talked about them, there are also these longer vetting reports that are produced by the automated detection pipeline. So we're going to look at those. I'm going to share my screen.
Great.
So we're going to go back to exo.MAST, which we talked about just a couple of weeks ago. And we're going to once again look at a couple of candidates that have these vetting reports. So as a very brief reminder, not all candidates have vetting reports, but exo.MAST is a good way to check whether a candidate does have a vetting report, and it has a vetting report if it was flagged by the automated detection pipeline. So most of the time that is because it has multiple transit-like signals in the light curve.
Okay,
So
cool.
one way to check if it has a vetting report is to type in tick and then the tick ID. And if it doesn't have a vetting report, then nothing comes up. And if it does have a vetting report, then all of these different options come up.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to choose a vetting report for two sectors, so sector 14 and sector 16. And we're going to search for that. So this is hopefully looking quite familiar.
Yeah.
And we will just let that run.
I really like this website too. I don't know if any of the people who created this watch our episodes, but it's just really the way it's laid out. It's very user friendly to
Yeah,
actually go.
it's really good. I have to also be honest, I've been using it a lot more since we did the episode on it than I did
Oh,
before. So
good.
I learned a lot during that episode.
I love it.
So let's click up here to the related links, which brings us back to these vetting reports. And if you remember last time, we just looked at the vetting summary page. But this time we're going to very quickly look at the other two. So we'll start off with the DVM vetting report. So this is kind of the intermediate sized vetting report. And I mean, to be honest, I find this one the most useful. I find the full vetting report a little bit overwhelming, but we'll get to that in just a moment. We'll start off with this one. So we just click on that, it gets downloaded. We can click on that and open it. All right, so this is the vetting report. This is just for two sectors. It's listed at the top, sector 14 to 16. Sorry, it's not two sectors, that's three sectors, 14, 15, and 16. So what we have here is we have the full light curve at the top, and we have the times of the transit events indicated by those blue little triangle things. And the green lines that we have here, they're the times of the momentum dumps. So we've talked about momentum dumps before. They're times when the test is a little bit unstable. So we want to make sure that not all of our transit events fall on top of those momentum dumps.
Right.
Then in this panel here, I might zoom in on this a little bit, we have the phase folded light curve. So this is really useful because you can check whether there is a secondary eclipse. So we have mentioned secondary eclipses before in terms of odd and even transits depth. So if you have another event that has a different transit depth, a secondary eclipse, that would tell you that this is an eclipsing binary. So we can't see anything in the phase folded light curve. Then underneath that, we have another face folded light curve. This time we just zoomed in on the transit event.
Mm-hmm.
We see a model of it there. Down here, bottom left, we have the odd and even transit depths. This is a great, kind of another great test to do, again, to see whether you have those odd and even transit depths. In this case, we don't. Now, this plot we talked about before, this is to check whether the kind of candidate is on target. And I talked about how last time when if it's not on target, then a different star is that red one. So this is an example where this is a false positive because this star over here is shown in red, whereas our target is over here at the center of that blue circle. That's where our candidate is. That's the target or the target star that we are looking at. But this difference image test here is telling us that that signal is coming from a different star. So this is in fact a false positive.
Wow.
And we can tell that from this plot here. Nonetheless, we will keep going through what these plots are.
So we talked about this before where we were looking at the depths and everything else. So is that third plot, if you can go in where that blue line is, yes, it says SEC depth. I want to give an educated guess that that means secondary depth. And because we know that there isn't one, it's a blue line and it looks like it's just like dead. There's nothing there. There's no transit event.
Yeah, exactly. No, that was a perfect description
You
of
heard
what
it.
that
She
is.
said exactly.
I don't even need to add anything to that. That was so this plot just shows the deepest kind of event outside of the primary eclipse, so a potential secondary eclipse. And exactly as you said, it's a flat line, so there is no secondary eclipse, which is great. But yeah, your description was perfect. And
I want to thank the Academy. No, I'm just kidding. All right. It's my one moment here.
Okay, cool. So this plot underneath here is just a model of the transit, and above it you can see if you kind of you have the transit events, and if you have that red model on top of these blue data points, remove that model, then above it you have the residual. So what you're left with once you've removed the model. So if you have a flat line in those, then that just means that the model fits. Once you've subtracted a model, you want that flat line. And down here, you have the summaries. So you have kind of the fits, what the period is, what time the transits are. And here you have those red things highlighted because these are things that were bad about this candidate and why it's a false positive. So you have the offset, so you can see that it's off target by a certain amount. All right, well, that was a not so brief recap of what we did last time. Hopefully that was all very familiar. We'll now move on to the second page, which shows the difference images. So this is something that the LATE reports also cover and is somewhat an extension of, if we go back to the first page, is somewhat of an extension of this difference image plot at the bottom that shows you that it's off target. So what we have here is we have the out of transit flux. If you have the average flux around the target, I should first say the target is shown by the brightest pixels, so by the lighter colored pixels. So if you have the average flux on either side of the transit, that's what that image is showing. Then here on the bottom left, you have the average flux during the transit. And up at the top here, you have the difference between the two. So if you take the difference between the two, then the brightest pixel remaining is where that difference in the brightness was. The background should be the same brightness out of transit and in the transit. There's no variation in background there. So when you subtract the two, that should be 0. There should be no flux remaining. So that's what we see by that 0 there. The flux in the difference image is 0. But the pixel where that transit event is occurring, where the flux is different in transit and out of transit, that will be the brightest remaining pixel in this difference image. And if we zoom in on that, you can see that that pixel is not the same pixel as we had during and out of transit. And you can see our target is on this pixel down here, see just indicated there, but the difference in flux where that transit-like signal is coming from is 1 pixel higher up, indicated by that red triangle, which is again showing us what we already knew from the first page, that this is an off-target signal that we are looking at.
Yeah. So does this just help to further confirm that it is indeed a false positive then? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So we have these plots for, so the next 3 pages are just the same plots for 3 of those transit events. I'm not going to go through all of them. They all show exactly the same thing. They all show that it's off target.
Yeah.
All right. So then here we just have that same thing again. I should say that first page was the summary of the rest of what's in this report. So often I don't go beyond the first page unless I want to look into the fine details a little bit more. But usually that first page tells you everything you need to know. So this is kind of exactly the same as what we had before. You have this is where the target is, this is where the signal is coming from. And down here you have the same thing, but you have an image of the surrounding stars. So on this next page here, you have, if we just look at the top panel here, you have the raw flux time series. So these are the light curves extracted for 3 different sectors. So we have a key here, we have in red, we have sector 14, in green, we have sector 15, and in blue, we have sector 16. So this is sometimes helpful to compare if it's a very variable star or something. We can compare the light curves in different sectors right next to each other. And this is raw flux time series, so this has not been detrended yet. So sometimes detrending can introduce systematics, so it's always good to check the raw light curve as well. All right, underneath we just have, again, we have the flux time series. This time it has been detrended, and we just have the times of the transit events marked on in red. And again, we have it for 3 different sectors. All right. Now this is again very similar. These are phase folded light curves. We have it for unwhitened flux time series. So this has just not had very much detrending. We have it for whitened. Some whited noise or some noise has been removed from the light curve. Essentially what we have here is just we have 3 different versions of this light curve that lets us see what it looks like. And on the final pages, all you have is you have a list of all the nearby targets. So you have the tick IDs. Next to it, you have the magnitude, so how bright it is. Remember, smaller number means brighter. And the distance next to it there is just how far away it is from the target. So this can be really useful to see how many targets there are nearby, and if any of them are very, very bright, and if they could be the result, or could be causing that signal that we are seeing. So it just gives you an idea of the surrounding field. So there's a lot of stars nearby, so that list continues on to the next page, and actually onto a third page. Okay, so that is the intermediate length DV report. Like I said, I very rarely go beyond the first page, but if you do want more information, then there is more information on those subsequent pages. Right. But instead, let's go back and look at the full vetting report. So if you're really, really interested in a candidate and you really want to know exactly what's going on, then we can look at the full vetting report. Okay, so this is the full vetting report. It's quite long, so we'll probably go through it quite quickly. I will just point out the plots that I think are the most important. As I said, there is a lot of information in here. I don't use the vast majority of this information, but I will try to explain it to the best of my ability. Okay, so the first page is just a contents page. If we go to the third page second page after the title page, we have a summary. So you just have the tick ID, you have where it's located, so the ARIA index, you have the brightness, the radius, so just lots of different information about the target itself. We can then, at the bottom here, it tells you whether it has been flagged as a TOI. So it has not, because as we already saw with the other vetting report, this is a false positive.
42 pages. Sorry, I just now saw that at the very top. Oh my gosh. I mean, that I like the, but on page 3, it says, false. So if you want to continue on, by all means, obviously, but that I can see now where you stay to the first few pages, because that's where you find out all your info.
Exactly. Yeah. These summary pages are really, really useful. Yeah, but we'll see how many pages we get through. So here we have on this page, this survey image, so we have an image of the surrounding. So we just saw this on the other slightly shorter report. On this one, we don't have all the stars listed, but we do see what's around the target. Here we have, this is exactly the same figure that we just saw in the other report. We have the 3 sectors that this was observed in, and we have the transit events flagged. This is again also the figure we just saw on the on the other report, so I won't go through it again, but we'll get to page 7 because this is the very useful and very important page. So this is, oh, they call it the dashboard page. I see why. So for a good candidate, none of the boxes should be red. Red indicates that it is a cause for concern, something is wrong with that test, double check that test. So we already, spoilers, we have already looked at this candidate, we already know this is off target. So we have one of those boxes and it's called the difference image centroid offset box is red. And that makes sense because we already saw that this is off target. Right. But you want all of those boxes to be green if it is a good candidate.
Okay. I think the dashboard is like a really good, and that's perfect. And going into these in depth, what other thing do you think would be most useful?
Yeah, so I think the other important test is the odd and even transit comparison. Very, very important. It's also important to check whether this box, the model fitter, is red, because if this one's red, most of the time, at least as far as I found, it's because the planet radius is too big. If the planet radius is, or the modeled planet radius is too big, it's most likely an eclipsing binary, so that the signal is caused by a star as opposed to a planet. So those 3 will be the most likely reasons why any of those boxes would be red.
So obviously this is a very lengthy report, and clearly you can go into it and look at it just to see, what other things are in there. But for the purposes of today, because we don't want to continue on and do like an hour-long episode, I think we should probably stop here, page 7, unless you think there's anything else that jumps out at you that you want to mention, Nora.
So I just want to say that the rest of the report, it has a lot of numbers in it, but a lot of the figures should look very familiar to you. So if we just, for example, just show a couple of those, you have already seen this figure. We just talked about this figure here. These are just kind of the comparison tests. You have a lot of kind of light curves with various levels of detrending. So the only difference between this really long report and the report that we just saw before is that you have all these extra tables with lots of different numbers in them, and the numbers are just quantifying what the figures are showing. Now, when I look at these reports, I don't go into the details of these numbers. For the purpose of what I use them for and what I assume you want to use them for, we care about whether it's a false positive or not. And to do that, we don't need to look at all these numbers in detail because we have these fantastically useful summary plots that tell us where the problem lies. So I would suggest either looking at this page of this report or looking at just the first page of that other report that we looked at, because that gives you all of the information that you want. Also, another thing that I want to say about these reports is that I look at these reports every time that there is one for a candidate that has been flagged. And I look at them to see why it was potentially ruled out. So if I have a candidate that I think is real, but has one of these reports and isn't a test subject of interest, there has to be a reason as to why it has been ruled out. So I look at those reports and see whether the report makes sense. So last time we looked at reports where there were multiple events flagged, but only one of them was believed to be real. So remember, keep in mind, this is quite important, these reports require there to be at least 2, preferably more, transit events. But if there is a very deep single eclipse, it can be matched with just noise or something that isn't a secondary or second eclipse. So it's important to check these and to make sure that the reason why the candidate ruled it out is a valid reason. So it's always really useful to check these reports and just to understand the system a little bit more. But usually I don't look at the very long report. I just look at either the vetting summary page, the first page of the DVM report, or that 7th page, that summary report page of the full vetting report. So I would recommend that if you are looking at these reports to do the same.
But what's great is that there's options. What I love about this is that, and thank you for going into depth with these 2, there's options to go through it if you do want. And the full vetting report, I did notice at the bottom, there's like that nice paragraph at the bottom of each page, which really goes into fine detail about what you're looking at. So I think that's great, depending on your skill level and if you want to top up your knowledge with these things, whether you want to just look at it quickly or if you want to go into it in more depth for whatever reason. So thank you, Nora. Thank you for going through that. I think this is probably going to be one of our longer episodes going into report. So our apologies for that, but I hope that you were able to get some cool information from it. And let us know. Let us know like which report that you decided to go into, or if you had any other questions with it. We try not to go into too much depth with it because I think if we continue on this path, we're going to start to turn into a resources for reporting only. So we don't want to do too much. But if you have anything else, let us know. And of course, you can get in touch with us on YouTube, Twitter, as our social media channels, and we post everything to planethunters.coffee too. Well, thank you very much, Nora. This was a very fascinating and in depth episode. We hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Thank you.
Bye.